All right, as people are joining, I'm just going to kick things off. Can I get a thumbs up? Just make sure you guys can hear me. Awesome. All right, so welcome everybody to our November TUG. Maybe if my screen will change. Just a reminder to make sure that you're getting updates to our events as well as any other news that we share, surveys, other community events that I would want to make you aware of. Make sure that you're actually RSVPing to both our event, which you can see up at the top. It'll have an RSVP button. If you just go to usergroups.tableau.com/Pittsburgh, you should actually get to our hub page, which lists all our past and future events and lets you subscribe for updates. That ensures when I create an event and I send out email invites, you're getting those emails, as well as after this meeting to ensure that you're getting the follow-up materials and recordings. If you're not in our LinkedIn group, for example, I also use that hub to send out lists of attendees to make sure that you're getting any materials shared by our presenters. I'm very excited to introduce a member of, now I'm calling it the Pittsburgh leadership team. Nikki has graciously offered to lend me a hand in running this TUG since I've pretty much been solo for 6 years. So I'm very excited to have the help. Just to introduce myself again real quick, because I know we have new people all the time. I'm a senior principal consultant. I work at PH Data. I've been running this TUG since 2016. I am a former math teacher turned consultant, found my love of Tableau in grad school and have been using it ever since. Some other things about me: I'm a twin, I'm a dog mom, and I love all things outdoors. Go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, I am Nikki Mayolo. I am a systems analyst at Community Care Behavioral Health, which is a subsidiary of UPMC. For those of you who are in Pittsburgh, I've been working in Tableau for about 7 years since I was introduced to it in a job, and same as you, just fell in love with it. In my free time, I enjoy baking, and I am a black belt in karate. I have 2 cats that keep me entertained and a husband. And yeah, it's nice to be part of the team.
Welcome. So a few quick Tableau happenings. EduVisitors is a community project I haven't highlighted before, so just wanted to make sure I made people aware of it. I know we have a big education community. So this is a monthly project that connects real education data with real people. So, you know, another way to get along with like-minded people or like industry people. I always highlight Brandy's Data Book Club. Again, if you want a space to read data related content and talk with people reading the same stuff and having similar interests, please join her book club. And then I wanted to remind everyone, coming up in December, there's going to be a Tableau Fringe Fest. If you've never been a part of it, it's a virtual global event with speakers from all over who talk about various data related topics. Our agenda today, we're going to be talking about Tableau and Python and how those work together. And then we're going to be talking about how to design accessible dashboards. And then we'll finish the session with some Kahoot trivia and your chance to win a prize. So Aidan's going to lead us through the Tableau plus Python session, and I will let him introduce himself. And then Lisa, and Aidan, by the way, is from London, so he might win a prize today for being probably the furthest away from Pittsburgh if we're counting people being local. Lisa is a Pittsburgh local and has offered to talk with us about how to design accessible dashboards. Real quick, during the session, please use the Q&A box, and you should see that in your Zoom panel, to ask questions of the panelists. I'll try to answer them if I can during the session. Otherwise, we've reserved time at the end, and they will address those live. Otherwise, if you want to chat during the sessions or have general comments, please use the chat feature, where we'll be monitoring as well during the session. And I know, if the speakers interact, feel free to kind of have your discussion related stuff in there. This session is being recorded, so if you have to drop for any reason or you have a meeting, no worries. I will be sharing the recording as well as any materials shared with me after the session. So without further ado, let's begin. So Aidan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Sip of water. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Aidan Moore. I am head of analytics at a company called Informa, where I work in the business operations team. So it's a lot of Salesforce data that I number crunch, and I've been using Tableau for about 9 years now, which I think makes me a little bit of a Tableau veteran. I've always had a desire to have Tableau really as my kind of action center. So I have Tableau embedded within Salesforce, as many of you will. But I've constantly been looking for ways to extend the scope of Tableau. And I love playing around with applications and seeing if I can make them do things that perhaps the developers of the application didn't particularly intend. And that is some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. I'd like to start, though, if I may, just with, well, it might help if I share my screen. Actually. Let me do that first. I'd like to start, if I may, with just a couple of questions for you. Is there anybody in the audience, if you just shout out in chat, is there anybody in the audience who currently uses TabPy? Just pause for a moment. I shall take that as a no. That makes me the only one. That's quite exciting. Okay. I wasn't expecting many, but I thought there might be more than none. Question 2, is there anybody in the audience who is familiar with Python code? Who has written any Python code? Yes, good, there's one. Alison, oh good grief. Right, quite a few. I don't know how many, but quite a few. And that very much sort of backs up what from other people that I've been talking to around TabPy. TabPy isn't a widely known about tool, but in my personal opinion, it is the unsung hero of the Tableau ecosystem. And the fact there are so many of you who are saying, yes, you can code in Python, but haven't used TabPy, I think that's a great opportunity. And I hope that what I'm going to talk about next is of interest and might persuade some of you to give it a try. So what is TabPy? That's a question for me, not for you. So TabPy came along in, I think it was version 10.2 a few years ago now. And essentially TabPy is a Python server. You can set it up on your local machine, you can set it up on a server machine. And what it does is it takes inputs from Tableau table calculations, very specific Tableau table calculations that I will go through. And it processes those calculations in Python, and then it returns results back to Tableau so that they can be used in your vizzes. At least that is what Tableau intended TabPy for. But like I say, I like to play around with applications and stretch them a little bit. So we will cover some of the kind of data sciencey things that TabPy was originally intended for, but also we'll cover some other stuff which I think is a little bit more exciting. So TabPy is one of 4 analytics extensions. Initially, there were only 2. There was TabPy and RServe. In recent times, they've added Einstein Discovery. If you have a subscription to Einstein in Salesforce, you can use that as an analytics extension. And you can also use the analytics extension API. So if you wanted to connect maybe to MATLAB, you would use the analytics extension API. But the pure focus of this talk is, in my view, the best analytics extension, TabPy. So for all of you who haven't got TabPy, the good news is that by the time, within the time it takes me to do this talk, about, let's say, 25 minutes, you could all download, install, and have TabPy running on your local machine. Let me talk you through how I would do that. If I was you, there are perhaps 3 different ways that you can get a hold of TabPy. I'm going to tell you absolutely the easiest way is to use the Anaconda distribution of Python. So if you download Anaconda, that will then give you a very quick personal route into using TabPy. If you're doing it at an enterprise level, you didn't want to pay the fees for Anaconda, then you may just use native Python. The disadvantage of using native Python and the benefit of using Anaconda is that Anaconda comes pre-installed with a whole bunch of useful Python libraries that might make your initial journey with TabPy a little bit easier. So Aidan's law of TabPy number 1 is that in Anaconda we trust, and down in the bottom corner I've popped a little QR code for anybody interested in the Anaconda distribution. You can find it there. So you download Anaconda, you click on the executable file. It'll ask you it'll give you a couple of prompts. I always choose the default. And then you will have Anaconda installed. Once you have it installed, you then need to type in conda install -c Anaconda TabPy -server. It'll again ask you a couple of questions, and eventually it will tell you that it's installed. And then to actually run, I can give a demo of this. We type in TabPy. Simple as that. So now I have TabPy running. I can see that it's on my port 9004. So if I go to Help, Settings and Performance, Manage Analytic Extension Connections. This is set up on localhost, so it's my own personal machine. If you wanted it on, if you want a Tableau server to be able to connect to it, then you would need to set it on a server somewhere. I think it's pretty much the cheapest AWS Linux box. It cost me a couple of $1,000s a year, and that's my TabPy server in production, but as well only on development, I'll use my local host. I can test my connection and see that I now have Tableau Desktop connected to TabPy. Now, Aidan's law of TabPy number 2 is that Google knows an awful lot more about TabPy and, in fact, things in general than Aidan does. There's a very good blog on the Data School that will talk you through the installation of TabPy via Anaconda, if anybody wants to do that. So I'd like to take you back in time a little bit, back to 2019, or a period referred to as before COVID. And in 2019, I was lucky enough to go to 2 Tableau conferences. One of them was in Berlin, here in Europe, and I also went to the Las Vegas conference, which Las Vegas was pretty good, but I have to say, and I'm sorry if this offends the Americans, but I have to say that the European one was better in my view. There was a fantastic presentation by Rachel Bowes, who was talking about advanced analytics with Python. If you're interested in viewing it, there's a QR code there. I can see it's been viewed 1.1, about 1,100 times. I think I probably account for about 100 of those. And I ended up in this talk by Rachel almost quite by accident. My phone wasn't working and I didn't know which session to book. And there was a whole bunch of people walking up some stairs to a room. So I followed these people, and luckily enough, they were part of the Tableau conference. So I sat in this room and Rachel started talking all about TabPy, and it absolutely blew my mind. I got very excited about the potential for using TabPy as this action center that I mentioned earlier. So I came home and I had a look for TabPy, and I went onto the GitHub site. QR code for GitHub is there. I had a look at it and I read the blurb, how you can execute Python code on the fly and display results in Tableau visualizations. Now, that didn't particularly help me an awful lot in terms of my ambition of having Tableau as my action center, but it was certainly interesting enough. Given that Tableau intend TabPy to be used as really a data science tool, though, let's explore one of the kind of classic use cases that Tableau have for TabPy, and that is sentiment analysis. So if you Google TabPy examples, you'll see two or three items of two or three blogs about sentiment analysis. I can see I've been playing with this and I didn't reset it. So let me just put that back to how it was. So with sentiment analysis, what is happening here? I have a text string, and that is being fired using a table calculation into TabPy. Python is then doing a sentiment analysis on this text string, which says love, love, love in capital letters with an exclamation mark. And Python is then returning back to Tableau via TabPy a score for that string. So love, love, love is 93% positive, which is great. What happens if we try hate? Well, hate is 91% negative. Interestingly enough, that hate is only 91% negative, whereas love is 93% positive. So perhaps that means, from a statistical point of view, that love is stronger than hate. I don't know. Somebody's dropped a question in. Would 2 or more exclamation marks get you to 100? It may well get me closer. Let's see. No, well, 3 didn't. 4. Oh, well, interestingly enough, 4 makes it less. There we go. Yeah, good point. Maybe the exclamation marks make it more positive. So a lot of people started with things like song lyrics. Is a nice song, 9 Inch Nails, although I think we can all agree that Johnny Cash did it a little bit better. And in that scenario, this is from the song Hurt. It's negative 77%, so a very, very sad song lyric. If we let a bit of Gloria Gaynor into our life, though, about survival, love, things like that, it goes up to 81%. So this is kind of the classic use case for TabPy. You have some information, maybe you have a table with a bunch of tweets in it or something of that nature. You fire it into TabPy, and then the Python script will then perhaps run your sentiment analysis on it, do some clustering for you, any of the other kind of data science stuff that you can do in Python. But just going to duplicate that. But in terms of my ambition to have Tableau as my action center, I went off and I got a calculation that was similar to this, and I thought there's a few bits that I don't need here. They're not going to help me with my action center. So I'm going to take a few of these bits out. I don't want those. I do want that, but indentation is important in Python, so let me unindent it. Actually, I don't want that. So this is what I ended up with. I perhaps should say at this point there are 4 different calculations that that you can use with TabPy. Well, script bool, so that returns true or false. Script int, that will return whole numbers. Script real numbers, and script string, strings. So in this case, I now have a script real. I'm creating a list in Python, and I'm adding 0 to that list, and I'm telling it to return that. And if I then swap my new calculation with my old one, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? It does absolutely nothing. And that's brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. Because what this tells me is that TabPy is not restricted to particular Python libraries. It doesn't force me to use particular data science libraries. I can do absolutely anything that I want in Python. I also have a favorite line, and it's this line here with nothing in it, because that means that I can fill that line with any Python script I can think of. So let's have a look at the type of Python scripts that I might want to put in there. So this is a connection that I have to SQL. I'm going to refresh that connection. comment about running Slack messages and emails. That would be interesting. Emails, I'm not sure it would work because of the way the natural language toolkit works in Python. I'm not sure that you'd get a particularly good result because of the number of neutral words. I think that would kind of balance your score a little, but certainly Slack messages, Twitter, if Twitter even exists at this point in time, that would be awesome. So I've just refreshed my SQL connection. You can see I have absolutely no data available. If I come onto this dashboard, and I'm going to hit my SQL button, now I'm going to go back to my SQL connection, and I'm going to refresh it. And I'm going to wait a moment while my exceedingly slow thing works. And there we go. As if by magic, I now have a row of data. So what has happened there is I have managed to fill that empty gap with some code of my choice. And this code is simply importing the PyODBC library. It comes as standard with Anaconda. Otherwise, you can download it. I've got an insert statement. I'm taking my username from Tableau, I'm taking a bit of text, and that's run that. So that was good. That was a great first start in helping me to understand how I could build my action center in Tableau. Now, the next exciting thing that I did was I had a look at an automation tool that I have. This is a tool called UiPath, but don't get hung up on the tool because there are other automation tools available. And at the moment, this is a queue, so it's a kind of an API. I can interact with that queue via APIs. So if I go back to my dashboard here, at the moment the queue is empty. I hit my button here on the dashboard, and it's a nice intuitive part of the dashboard as well. So some extensions out there can be not so intuitive, but I really like the way this just blends into the dashboard. If I go back to my system here, I'm going to refresh that. And I can see again, as if by magic, I now have a new item in my UiPath queue. So I've been able to reach out, I've been able to stick some code in the middle in that blank line that has enabled me to pass information that I want to from my Tableau instance through to my automation tool. So there's also a button on there that does email, but I can see I'm about to go over time if I'm not careful. So I will not look at that one. So Aidan's law of TabPy number 3 is that if you find out in TabPy that you can do nothing like I did, then that opens you up to do absolutely everything. But all that's kind of theoretical at the moment. So let's have a look about how I have helped the business that I work for. So part of the business that I work for were in discussions about acquiring a pricing approvals tool. There was a definite need for one, but because of some restructuring in the business, they decided it wasn't the right time to go out and purchase a tool. So it came down to me to see if we could build something that would satisfy that requirement. So I have an opportunity here in my UAT environment. I have some products on that opportunity. I have Tableau embedded already in each opportunity page, and I have a pricing approvals process that I have built in Tableau using TabPy. So what this is doing is interacting with some replicated data, and it's pulling in the information from Salesforce replication about this particular opportunity. It's going to give me the opportunity line items. I've got a fake list price. I've got a fake sales price. Tableau is making a calculation who needs to approve it based on these sales price and these list prices. People can scroll down to the bottom, and here, very similar to the Superstore dashboard, I have a button. And what that is now doing is it is pinging all this information about this opportunity into my automation tool. Okay, again, don't get hung up on the tool. You could ping it into a SQL server and then have a batch script running off it if you chose to do so. Now, on the back of that, what the automation tool is going to do is send the approver an email, and that's going to contain a link to another Tableau dashboard. It's also going to send me as the person who has submitted it an email. Oh, so there's the email to me, and the email to the approver has just come in. So the approver can click on this email, and what they're going to see is a very similar screen to the one that we just looked at, only at the bottom of that, there are two different buttons. And they can use those two buttons to either approve or to decline the pricing of this particular opportunity. So that's just coming up now. It's being a bit slow. But yeah, there's an approve button and a decline button, exactly the same deal. When you click the button, it fires in the table calculation, which goes off to TabPy. TabPy then interacts with the API that I've told it to within my script. And it records a record and helps with the pricing approvals. So let me go back on that. Oh, no, let's stop the bit. So that's a great tool. But having told you what a great tool it is, I'm now going to tell you why it's not as great as it could be. And I'm going to tell you how TabPy can help me make it better. So the problem with this tool is that it is based on Salesforce replicated data, and that can be anywhere between 15 minutes and a couple of hours behind the live information. So let's say I have this this product, this insurance day. You're my customer. I really like you, so I am going to do you a special deal on insurance day, and I'm very keen to get this deal. So I'm going to offer it to you for £1. Luckily, I get to approve my own opportunities, which kind of helps a lot when you're trying to sell things for £1. I'm going to go into my analytics system, which is based in Tableau. I'm going to go and submit my pricing approval. Oops, daisy. This is the step that I should have done just a moment earlier. So if I go back into that, pricing approvals, I'm going to submit it for pricing. And what you'll notice is that £1 special offer that I've just had a chat with you about, it's not currently showing. And the reason it's not showing is because it's not based on replicated data. But we know already that we can interact with a SQL server, for example. We know already that we can interact with an API. So how might we overcome the problem of data replication and the delay? Let me show you how we do that. So I go back into my analytics pane. Now I'm going to hit my super secret button. Don't tell anybody that's there. I'm now going to submit my pricing approval. And what you will notice now is that it has updated with the opportunity information. So my discount has moved up to 100%. You'll see that my sales price has changed to 1. So how is it doing that? And I can show you here. Oop, no, I can't because I haven't got it open. What is happening here is that similar to the other scripts, I am doing a couple of different things. And it's being very slow to open. So in this particular table calculation, if it lets me show you, what I'm able to do here, so it's exactly the same deal. I'm creating my, I've got my script reel, so that tells Tableau to go out to TabPy. I've got my score list. I'm adding 0 to that list. And then anything that I do in the middle is just being done by Python. It's not really impacting Tableau too much. So I'm making a request of setting up a method to interact with SQL Server. I'm getting some, passing some information that tells it how to connect to Salesforce. I'm then interacting with the Salesforce API directly to get all the information for that Ollie. I'm then putting that into a SQL table. And then when I do that jump, using the button to request pricing approval, that is then interacting with the dashboard that's on a live connection to this SQL table that I've just created. So I know that it's just been announced that they're going to do a live replication with Snowflake, but for those of us who don't have Snowflake, and prior to that being announced, I like to think that I was perhaps the first person in the world to have live Salesforce information in my Tableau dashboards. So I am more or less at the end. Just a note, I'm not a professional Python coder, but Stack Overflow is always great. If you have any problems with your code. I did do a blog with Toan Hong, who kindly hosted it on his website. So if you want to see if you want to try the example of interacting with a SQL server and adding a line of data to a SQL, there's a QR code there for you. I will share this with Jen later. Law number 5, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn if you're trying this and have any questions. I'd be more than delighted to help you. And law number 6 is that I will pretend to know the answer to any questions that you might have. And I should also point out that I don't generally talk about myself in the third person. But that's it. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you found that interesting. And if I've inspired just one of you to take on the challenge of using TabPy, then I would be delighted with that. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Aidan. I didn't see any questions come through while you were speaking in the Q&A, but would encourage anybody, if you have any questions now for Aidan, to go ahead and put them in the QA and we'll get them answered. Or take yourself off mute and ask it. It was a great talk, Aidan. I think the important point here is, right, a lot of times with the particulars, right, we're going to Google or we're going to have to figure out how to kind of customize, but I think it's awesome to see, you know, just those general use cases and sort of things that you've run into. Yeah, and it's really what I hope I've got across today is that it's about the framework. Really, is that starting off your table calculation, persuading Tableau that you're using TabPy, but then doing literally anything that you want. So you're limited only by your own imagination of what you want to achieve, and where, you know, if you can do it in Python, then you can stick it in the middle of that table calculation, and it will do it, which is fantastic. I was super excited when I found that out. So yeah, I suppose I should say actually two things I didn't say. As there's no questions, I'll just cover very quickly. One of the things is that it's probably not best practice to have those big long scripts in your table calculations, particularly not when you have credentials in, but you can save those scripts onto your TabPy server, and then you can call them as methods on your server. So that makes it a little bit more secure and also a little bit easier to code, but it wouldn't have been much good for a presentation because you'd just seen one line with a whole bunch of attributes being passed to it. And the second thing, I can't remember, but there we go. Throw it in the chat if you remember it while we're talking. And as Aidan mentioned, again, I will share anything that he shares with me as well as contact information. I'm sure Aidan is more than happy to answer questions should anyone, you know, jump into the TabPy mix. So without further ado, then I'm going to turn things over to Lisa. So thank you, Aidan. Thanks.
Okay, let me share my screen. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay, hi, yeah. Okay. I cannot see your screen yet. You can't see my screen? No. Oh, because I need to share it, that might help. Is that it? Cool, yep. Okay. Okay, hi, my name is Lisa Kessler. I'm a data analyst with the Allegheny County Department of Human Services. I'm going to go over today how to create dashboards with accessibility in mind for users with different types of disabilities, and also some best practices on how to incorporate those principles into your dashboard design. So I got interested in this primarily because I learned by trial and error. I inherited Tableau 7 years ago when I started at DHS and was tasked with designing a public-facing dashboard about the Allegheny County homeless population. And I made this mess. I presented it to the Bureau of Homeless Services, and one staff member quickly told me, I don't understand what this is supposed to be showing me. And it turned out that he was colorblind. So that was my first kind of foray into accessibility. So not only are the colors not colorblind friendly, they're redundant, these colors don't mean anything, the text is too small, there's too many charts, and there's just a whole bunch of things that make it the perfect example of what not to do in terms of thinking about accessibility as you design. So what is accessibility? We're defining it as the usability of a system by people with disabilities, with the idea that there's many types of disabilities, each with a spectrum of needing little to a lot of assistance. About a quarter of adults in the United States have a disability. In terms of visual impairments, because Tableau is mainly a visual platform, about 6% of United States citizens over 12 have a disability, have a visual impairment, and then 1 in 12 men are colorblind, with 1 in 200 women. So it's important to consider those things when you're going through your design process. So this is an example. The main type of colorblindness also is red-green colorblindness. So this is an example of that. And then it's important to consider too that data visualization in itself is a form of accessibility technology, because you're taking what normally would have been, you know, complicated data tables and putting them in a digestible way for people to interpret the data that way. So with that, a lot of these principles go into universal design, which is the idea that you're not just designing to make it easier for understanding for people who have a specific type of disability or impairment, but rather how can we make the experience of using the dashboard or the product better for all users, regardless of what their specific needs might be. An example of that would be automatic doors at a supermarket. Obviously, for people who have some kind of mobility impairment, they're necessary to go in and out of the store, but just for the regular consumer who's carrying a lot of bags in their arms, it's also necessary to access the store. Same with curb cuts. If if you're using a wheelchair or a walker, they're necessary to cross the street, but also helpful if you're riding a bike or a scooter, or rolling a bag or pushing a stroller. So with that, accessibility design is a design choice. So every step of the way, there's just things to consider to make sure that your users are able to understand what you're putting out there. It's also much easier to start with accessibility in mind than to go back and retrofit it after. So just as you're designing new dashboards, something to consider. So the main set of accessibility guidelines are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3. The goal of this was to create one standard set of internationally recognized web content accessibility rules, and to establish technical standards about how web content interacts with assistive technologies. So there's 4 principles that go into the WCAG, and those are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable is the idea that users must be able to process the information that you are putting on your content. For example, if you have a video, it's adding closed captioning for people who might have an auditory impairment, so that they can understand what the video is trying to convey. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single element on the dashboard has to contain some kind of alternative way to access it, but in general, the content should be understood by people using screen readers or other assistive technologies. Operable is the idea that users should be able to interact with the dashboard with whatever assistive technology or device they use. This includes, can operations be performed with a keyboard, and also not necessarily designing for the most up-to-date browser or software platform, because not everyone might have access to those. And then also providing sufficient instructions on how to operate and navigate through the dashboard. Understandable is the idea that users can follow the content being presented. It should be follow kind of a storyline and operate in a logical way, and then also additionally instructions on how to use the different, charts and filters that you've added to your dashboard, and also paying attention to making sure that colors and charts and too much information doesn't add unnecessary cognitive load to users. And then robust is also the idea that it should work across different devices, browsers, and platforms. So we'll go more into each principle, and then how to add elements to your dashboard design that cover those guidelines. So for perceivable, one of the ideas is that for all non-text content, including charts and graphs, there should be a text equivalent, a text alternative that serves the same purpose or explains the same thing that the chart does. So one of the ways that you can do that is by adding the ability to generate a crosstab. It's important to note that tooltips are not legible by screen readers. So while they're helpful in adding some context to what the chart's displaying, someone using a screen reader or a similar assistive technology can't gain understanding through the tooltip. By having the summary data available, you can kind of convey the same information. If you have a chart where it makes sense to do so, such as the amount of profit by category, you can have the option to do the download data if it makes sense for that level of accessibility of that. If it makes sense for the underlying data to be able to be downloaded. Obviously, if it's a security issue, then that's not maybe feasible. But not only can the crosstab be read by the screen reader, but also for people with maybe a lower level of data literacy, reading the chart might not be as intuitive as just looking at the raw numbers. So a crosstab might help users gain a better understanding of what you're trying to display. In the same vein, you can export the same crosstab to Excel. Tableau now has the option to create a download button, which you can access from the dashboard layout objects panel. So there's this dashboard option here, and then you can designate which kind of download that you want the user to have access to. So in this case, you would pick the crosstab, and then it would populate this download crosstab button, which would generate that summary statistic table to Excel. Excel is particularly good with screen readers, so that's another good option for making that data accessible. And also because it's such a familiar platform for many people to use, it might be easier to digest than the one that Tableau generates itself. Another thing to consider is adding alternative text, or alt text as Tableau calls it, to any image objects so that you can describe what is being pictured for the image. This is helpful for not only people who are visually impaired, but also if someone's using an older browser or a slow internet connection that makes the image not able to render, they can still take away what the image is trying to display. So for example, this is the logo for Allegheny County DHS, and then adding that alt text provides that text equivalent to what the image is showing. Another thing that you can add are captions. So you can provide an additional explanation to what the chart is conveying beyond what you would maybe put in the title. it's important that if you do add the caption that you make it visible. If it's hidden, then the screen reader can't read it. But also, again, for people with maybe not as much data literacy as another user, they can get a longer description of what the chart is trying to display, and maybe be able to interpret it better if they know more details on what's going on in the chart. Another idea under perceivable is the idea that it should be adaptable. The information and the relationships between the different elements on your chart should be easily determined or available through text descriptions in the instructions. So this is a list of all of the things that are able to be accessed with a screen reader. That includes the tabs, the worksheet titles and the dashboard titles, the information and the view underlying data window, which we saw with the crosstab generation, sheet captions, again, when they're visible. If they're hidden, then it's not going to be legible with a screen reader. The titles of filters and the drop downs in the filters, the color legend titles and text objects, and again, that image alt text that we just saw on the previous tab. It's important to note that axis labels, headers, anything in the chart area, like if you annotate a particular point on a chart, and again, the tooltips are not accessible by screen readers. So if you're relying on that only as the thing to provide extra context to your users, then people with visual impairments using assistive devices won't be able to access that information. So you can use text, again, to describe how the different parts of the dashboard relate to each other. In this example, you're describing that if you change the provider filter, how it's going to change the counts below, and then the different filters on this side of how they're going to interact with this too. One thing to avoid, I am guilty of this myself on a lot of the things that, again, I have to go back and retrofit, which is a whole nother beast on its own, is to avoid saying things like, use the filter to the right or click the green arrow to proceed. Because again, if you're using a screen reader assistive device, then those visual cues aren't helpful. Also, especially for the spatial cues, particularly if you're using something like a mobile device versus desktop, it tends to render the dashboard long versus wide. So if you put a filter over here, it might render over here or longer. So it might not make logical sense with those spatial cues of what filter you're trying to direct them to. And then again, with colorblind too, being aware of what colors you're choosing and adding color cues might not make it feasible for those users to access those directions. And yeah, so you also have the option to play with the different, Tableau has the option to, design for the different layouts. So you can see what it will look like on different devices, that you can use that too to see what happens when it renders, so that if you are using spatial cues, you're aware of what happens to those when you pull them up on different devices. So this is related to the previous slide. When you have a color legend or a similar thing related to a chart, you should incorporate the title of the chart into the legend. For example, if I'm using a screen reader and the screen reader reads the title of the chart and then it reads the options for the colors, I'm not necessarily sure that it's going with this chart because there's no indication. Additionally, again, if it renders separately, it might show up like below it or not next to it, so you wouldn't necessarily have that cue, the visual cue of it being next to the chart. So one way to make sure that you know which chart is associated with which legend is to incorporate the title of the chart into the title of the legend, just for extra clarity. So distinguishable is the idea that you can change different elements of your design so that people with visual disabilities who still have some sight can still get information from your dashboard. So one of those is making sure your color contrast is legible. The general rule for accessibility is 4.5 to 1. For regular size text, you can go to 3 to 1 for larger text, but 4.5 to 1 is considered the better ratio for accessible. Unfortunately, I don't really know why this was designed that way, but the tooltip color is this light gray, which fails that 4.5 to 1 color contrast. So it's important to note that when anything is that lighter gray that Tableau tends to default to, it might not be the best option for making sure the contrast is legible for people with visual impairments. So one way you can check is if you go to the edit color field in the design palette, and you have that right corner where the information on the color is, you can take that 6-digit hex, and when this gets sent out, you can access this link. There are a bunch of them, but you can test the color contrast ratios to see if they pass that 4.5 to 1 test. So here you can see that tooltip color doesn't pass, which always confuses me on why that was the choice. But if you went to black, then it's super. So just considering that you have dark enough text to go with your worksheets. With that, to avoid my rainbow disaster of my first dashboard, it's important to make sure that your color palette that you're using has enough contrast between the colors that they are distinguishable for people with visual impairments like that. Tableau does offer one colorblind color palette. I think it's like the third option in the color palette choices. This link again will be sent out, but this has more color palettes from the Tableau community that are custom. So there's those color palettes as well as instructions on how to load them into the Tableau options. Another way to simulate color blindness for something that you've put on server, or also for any website you have, if you hit F12 on Google, this is for Google Chrome. If you hit F12, then this like developer panel pops up and you have all these options. And if you scroll all the way down, there's this emulate vision deficiencies function you can use. So right now it's no emulation, so it's just what it looks like normally, but you can kind of go through and play with, how different types of colorblind will render with the choices that you've made for color. So you can see that this one's this is the Allegheny County Health Department's dashboard on fatal overdoses. So you can see that they made pretty good choices with their color palettes, because you can still distinguish them even with the vision deficiency emulation on. And then the other thing with that, so if you have a static image, there's websites that you can upload the static image to. This is one example, to see what the image looks like with the similar options for colorblind simulation. Also, if you have your own color palette template, you can kind of like, screenshot it like this and then upload it to see what that looks like in there too. Yeah, so however, there are instances where people can't see color at all. So even though that this light blue, this dark blue, and this gray are pretty distinct for most types of color blindness, there are people who won't be able to see that. So another way you can tell the difference between different categories or values on or elements on your chart is by adding shape marks too. So while I might not be able to see the difference between the colors, I will be able to distinguish between the circles, the squares, and the triangles. You can also add text labels, but just use your best judgment. If you have too many lines or too many intersections, it might get a little clunky and add a little more cognitive load than there needs to be when you're trying to parse out where the labels are. So moving on to operable, that's the idea that you can make sure that users can move through the dashboard in a way that makes sense and kind of follows the story of what you're trying to convey in your dashboard. So one of those is using headings and spacing to group related content. So this text block doesn't really give me any information on the relationship between these different titles or offices in this case, and then puts the burden on the user to kind of make that distinction. But by adding the space and the headings, I can see that like Allegheny County Department of Human Services is the top grouping, and then below that come the offices, and those are lateral, so they're next to each other. So using those kind of spatial cues allow people to understand the hierarchy of information, and again, reduce that cognitive load of trying to interpret the information all by themselves. Another thing, going back to titles, again, adding those clear and meaningful titles for all the filters, legends, and visualizations so that people know what they're looking at and what happens when they interact with a certain part of the dashboard. So for example, again, this is one I need to retrofit, but this one in terms of the titles, but for this one, it's showing the user has different options on filtering to different project types, what type of population that would be active, entered or exited clients, and then different start dates. So depending on what options they choose, that top title will dynamically change to show the user what selections they've made, so it's clear what information is being rendered. So those are helpful, especially if you have a bunch of filters where it can get confusing on what you actually turned on and what you actually turned off. So another thing to consider is the order of how you navigate through a dashboard with using a keyboard. For just this sake of time, I'm gonna just do this in here. So this is an example by Colin Smith. He's from Information Lab. He has a ton of like really good tips on creating accessible dashboards. So in this example, he wanted to make the challenge of how to change the units from kilograms to pounds, but using the keyboard. So if you tab through, you can see the highlighted blue is where the tab is currently on. So if I start again, I would expect it to start, with the title, with the description, with the filter, and then continue on. However, it starts with the filter, then goes up there, then goes to the Tableau. It doesn't really follow a logical order of what the story of the dashboard is in that sense. So yeah, with that in mind, it's important to set a logical focus order for the dashboard. The way that Tableau determines that tab order is the order in which you drag out the sheets. So while I'm like not often thinking about the order of dragging out the sheets as I'm working out a design, it's important to be cognizant of what story you're trying to tell, so you can kind of dictate that flow as you drag new things out to the layout, so that when you are navigating through, it does follow some progression. This link to you again will be sent. I'll send this out with the slides. It's instructions on how to edit the workbook XML to manually force the focus order of the worksheets. That's a little above my pay grade, but feel free to play with that. So where's and then this is just an example of one that had the order in a more logical way. So you start at the top with the filters, and then you go down, you go left and down as you progress through the different dashboard elements. And then when you do read the chart, it'll read the title first and then the components of the chart after. So this one will go down and then to the left, and then, yeah. So, I'm sorry, to the right, not to the left. So another thing you can do with that keyboard accessibility in mind is add an image object with the link on how to, on the different keyboard functions that relate to Tableau. I can't, where? So Tableau has this like main page for the different keyboard functions and what they relate, how they change the dashboard. So you can add a image object such as like a light bulb or an arrow or a question mark that will link to that web page for the keyboard accessibility. And again, important to add an alternative text so that someone who may need to access that and might not be able to visually see it will know what that web page will direct them to. Also with that too, you can add different URLs to, such as if I had a homelessness dashboard, I could link to maybe information on how to access an emergency shelter, things like that. Anything to add more information you can kind of do with an image object to a URL of more information, if that would be helpful for your use case. The last principle we're going to cover is understandable, which is a little more self-explanatory than the other ones. Basically, you need to ensure that the user is able to understand what you as the creator are trying to communicate in your dashboard. So this includes paying attention to anything that may create more cognitive overload, since there's too much to focus on, and anything that would distract the end user from taking away what you want them to take away. So one of those is choosing fonts that are easily legible. I come from the like AIM buddy profile of, you know, lots of decorative fonts and bright colors. So it's best to avoid those because they're a little overwhelming to the user and take away from your final message. Serif fonts are ones that have a little tail. You can kind of see it here, like Times New Roman. Those are best for print. But in terms of what's best for a dashboard or anything on a computer for web content, sans serif fonts, meaning ones without those tails, like Arial, Helvetica, or Verdana, are considered better choices. The default Tableau book, is that what it's called? Tableau fonts are, I'm 99% sure, are sans serif, so those are good choices for being legible text. Another thing is to eliminate any redundant information that doesn't add anything to, again, what you're trying to take away from the chart. So here we have sales by region and category with a different color for each category. I, as the user, I'm trying to interpret not only the relationship between region, category, and sales, but also what these colors mean. But in the end, they don't really add, they don't add any more information. So it's just one more thing I have to think about. So by removing anything like that, that doesn't add anything to the final message of the final takeaways of what you're trying to display, just creates a cleaner, easier way for people to interpret your dashboard. So just being mindful of adding unnecessary features and distracting people from what you want them to understand. Another thing is using common language and correct terminology. At least us in government work, we love acronyms and things that we think people understand, and they definitely don't. So just being cognizant of making sure everyone's on the same playing field of what terminology you're using. For example, nobody knows what the COC is or HMIS would be, so it's best to spell those out to make sure everybody has an understanding of what those are. Including things like fiscal year. You know, fiscal years operate differently. The HUD fiscal year operates, you know, July to June, and others might be calendar year. So just making sure, again, just using that language to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of what they're looking at on your dashboard. So although we've touched on this in other parts of the accessibility guidelines, it's super important to just hammer in providing instructions for using the content on the dashboard and using all those descriptive captions and titles and how they relate to each other really creates the best opportunity for users to understand how to utilize the dashboard. However, in this example too, this is the example of how to, this is a screenshot from the keyboard, the one that has the clear keyboard logic. And while it has like very clear instructions on on how to navigate through the dashboard, and then this question mark in the link will navigate to that keyboard accessibility list. I still don't know what ICT is. I still don't know what CCG is. So just being cognizant of making sure those things are defined also. And then just in terms of neurodiversity, a lot of the universal design aspects that center around that cognitive overload and clarity, such as too many colors or too many charts, are also helpful design practices for people with neurodiversity, including people with ADD, ADHD, dyslexia. By limiting the number of marks, charts, shapes, and colors to only display what's necessary, you're making it clear for people to not be overwhelmed by things that don't matter and to take away what the main point of the dashboard is. Yeah, the general rule is that you shouldn't have more than 10 colors or shapes. And I think I forget how many charts, but just being like aware of not just putting everything on one sheet to make it easier to where, just data dump, but kind of like thoughtfully add color, shape, charts, and progression through a story or the tabs as people navigate through so they can kind of understand the message as best they can. So in addition to all the links through the dashboard, these are just more resources. These first three are really helpful YouTube presentations from past conference years and other user groups. More links to the principles of accessibility, and then more from Tableau community on other ways to incorporate accessibility into your design. And then this final one, again, is that keyboard accessibility instructions page. Yeah, so thank you for caring about accessibility for a little bit. And yeah, if anyone has any questions.
We did have one question come through, Lisa. Allison says, what are your thoughts on a white text on a dark background? There seems to be mixed feelings in the community. And I'll add to that, forget what you called it, but the contrast emulator thing that you were showing. Yeah. I'm assuming that will work on that inverse relationship too, right?
Yeah.
It's not just always light, dark text.
No, background. You can pick your background color and you can pick your text color. Yeah. I think my own personal take is it can look harsh just because it's that brighter font, but it also depends on like what your end users are. Like I like most of my dashboards are for the general Allegheny County community, so I try to keep it as like simple as possible. But there are, especially like for more like artistic dashboards, there might be reasons to do that. But from a contrast ratio perspective, it still works.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I actually built my first dark dashboard this year, and so I wouldn't have even thought about that. But yeah, it's nice to have that emulator, and that regardless of which way you build, here we now have a tool to test. And thank you for all of the links. This will be great, and I'll share this out with everybody. If there's no further questions, I think we'll jump to the Kahoot part of the meeting, and we'll wrap things up. Are there any other questions? I'll give it one more minute, and thank you, Allison, for your question. Okay, and I meant to make the point, so I agree with Tess that this topic isn't talked about enough. So just a lot of great tips here and a lot of great resources. I feel like this is something we could probably talk about every meeting. So thanks again. So I'm going to steal the screen back if you want to stop sharing.
Yeah.
And hopefully you guys can see my PowerPoint screen again, or browser window. Yes. Good. Okay, cool. So before I start the trivia, I just wanted to kind of give you a notice of what it's about. So on our last meeting, I gave you guys a heads up about a tug community booster event that happened after our, like, since we met last, and it was a tug all about the different community tugs that they are, like, so community theme based. And, you know, like I said, even in our intro today, I try to highlight a different community based project that you can participate in. I will say there is another booster event coming up that's being led, I believe, through the Boston Tug, that's going to showcase all of the industry related tugs. So if you are working in a particular industry, I know we have a lot of health, finance, and education people, at least here in our local Pittsburgh community, but there's many other industry tugs, and even we're going to cover areas like, you know, there's a veterans tug. So if you'd be interested in any of those tugs that are outside of kind of our regional or the community ones that you see here, please be on the lookout for that. And I'll share that link on our Twitter and our LinkedIn and in this email recap so that you guys can look out for that. I believe it is the first week of December is the date for that. Like I said, I'll share that and confirm. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Kahoot trivia. You will need your cell phone to participate in this. And then I believe it will rank the top 3 people. I'm going to ask you right now, in case I forget to say it at the end, but if you do, or if you're one of the 3 winners, please just email your email and your name to pghtug, and I'll reach out to you about sending you a gift card. So let's begin. I will say each of these questions will have an image related to a community event. Don't pay attention to that image. It is not the answer to the question. So I'm not making it that easy for you, but there will be an image to some community event on each question. So coming up on the screen, there'll be a QR code. You can simply take the picture of that and it'll bring up a link that you can click on, or you can go to the kahoot.com and you're going to get a game ID. Give me 1 second. All right, so everybody should see the game pin at the top. Can you hear the nice music that is playing while we wait? Good. I'm gonna wait till I see most everybody jump in and then I will start the game. There will be 2 session related questions as well, so hopefully you are paying attention. Keep joining. I don't know if I can stop the game from starting in 6 seconds. I believe you can continue to join, so please throw in the chat if you're having trouble joining. So the question's going to pop up here on the screen, and then on your phone should be the answer choices in the form of color icons. It's our time, so get your answer in. Nice job. Valid should be understandable, I believe, if I remembered correctly, Lisa. And I will say the quicker you get your answer into, the more points that you get. This is from Aidan's session. Ooh, got some people on that one. So Java Connect should actually be the Analytics Extension API, was the 4th one that was not displayed there. All right, now we'll get into the community questions. So pick the community event that's being described at the top. So which event allows you to access 300 data sets and create better, more effective visualizations? Boy, Mark taking the lead. Nice job, guys. Wow, everybody knew that one. I will say, if you are missing these, definitely check out those community events and learn about them. Ooh, mixed group on that one. See if the leaderboard changes with only 2 people getting that one. Oh, I see Kylie making her way up. Mark holding strong on that one. All right, we're about halfway through the questions. That one might have been a little bit of a giveaway with the question. Wow, leaderboard isn't moving. It was a hard one. Had both education community initiatives in that one. Aidan takes back the lead. Here we go, a little bit of movement. All right, only a few more questions left. Remember, the images don't go with the question. They're just highlighting a community initiative. Good job, that was a quick one. Aidan holding strong. All right, 4 more. Well, let's say Back to Biz Basics is also great to participate in, even if you're a Tableau veteran, because it will still force you to like kind of relearn your foundations. Going to be a fast finger question, I have a feeling. Next group. All right, I think we're at the last question. Aidan retained his lead here. All right, congrats to Mark, Allison, and Aidan. Mark actually took first place. Hopefully you saw your name again. It was Mark, Allison, and Aidan. So if you guys could email me at pghtug. I don't know why this is starting again. We'll just X out of there. If you guys could email me, I'll get you a prize. Thanks, Nikki, for putting that in the chat. As a real quick recap, I want to thank everybody for attending. As I mentioned before, I'll share recording and any all materials I'll send out via email to our hub list, as well as those materials will then be placed on our Google Drive. If you do not know that we have a Google Drive, we have a shared Google Drive. This actually has materials from all of our past tugs. So if you do need access to that, please reach out to me. It is in our LinkedIn page. It was shared on Twitter, and I'll make sure to share it again. Also, if you would like to speak for 2023, we're trying to get a roster list. You probably noticed that question when you signed up. So thank you to anybody that said yes. Nikki will be reaching out to anybody that said yes to try and figure out, what topics you'd like to talk about and what time next year would work best for you. I imagine our next meeting, given that we have Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, will not be till February for Q1 of next year, because January usually tends to have lower attendance as well. So you have some time to think about it and plan. We're going to be sending out a end of year survey to just gauge how meetings have been going, frequency, time of day, that kind of thing. So again, please reach out. And if you have any other questions, if you are interested in any of those community events and don't know about them, they are all listed on Tableau's website as well. And again, feel free to ping me. I can help you find any information that you need. So thanks again. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week. See you next time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.